My name is Lena Brooks. I'm 34, I live in Vermont, and I've sworn off dating apps more times than I've actually been on a date. But after my mom guilt-tripped me for skipping her friend's second wedding, I found myself downloading one again, just so I could say I was trying. It was a Tuesday night in early October. You know, the kind where the air smells like wood smoke and regret. I showed up 10 minutes early, clutching my phone and rereading the last message from some guy named Doug who claimed he liked dogs and deep conversations. I picked the Italian place near the library not because it was romantic, but because they had garlic knots that could forgive a multitude of sins. Inside, the hostess barely looked up when I gave the name. She just waved toward a corner booth and told me I was early. I nodded like I knew what I was doing, walked over and sat down across from two kids and a woman who looked like she'd just run a marathon in flip-flops. One of the kids, a blonde blur of motion, was stabbing a straw into a lemonade. The other had a crayon in each hand and was quietly drawing what looked like a velociraptor wearing sunglasses. The woman looked up, her face surprised for half a second. Then she smiled. It wasn't the polite kind you give strangers. It was the kind you give when you're too tired to question anything anymore. We made eye contact. She tilted her head and said, kind of amused, "We just got our drinks. Want one?" I blinked confused, but before I could answer, the blonde one spilled his lemonade. The woman grabbed napkins with the efficiency of someone who's done this 1,000 times. I instinctively reached to help and then realized I had no idea who these people were. That's when it hit me. I was at the wrong table. Panic bubbled up, but so did something else. The woman glanced at me again, calm as ever, and said, "It's fine if you're here early. We're just waiting for our pizza." Her voice was steady, her eyes kind, like she knew I needed a reason to stay. And I did. For some ridiculous reason, I did. I opened my mouth to explain. Then the little one shoved a crayon into my hand and asked if I could draw a triceratops. So I stayed. I drew the world's worst triceratops. They clapped anyway. I don't know what kept me there. Maybe it was how the older boy asked the server for extra napkins like a tiny lawyer. Maybe it was the way the woman looked at both of them with this quiet, bone-deep affection, like even on the worst days they were still the best thing that ever happened to her. We didn't talk about jobs or dating profiles or who was supposed to be where. Instead, we talked about dinosaur names and favorite jelly flavors. I said strawberry. The younger one looked horrified and said that was for babies. I laughed harder than I should have. At one point, the woman asked if I'd had a rough week. I nodded. She nodded back. That was it. No advice, no fix. Just, "I see you." And somehow that meant more than a dozen perfectly worded messages from strangers who wanted to know my Myers-Briggs. The server came to check on us and didn't ask any questions. Just brought more lemonade and smiled. I wondered if he knew. Maybe he did. Maybe it didn't matter. By the time the pizza came, I had completely forgotten about Doug. I didn't even notice the time until the little one asked if he could dip crust in ketchup, and I nearly choked. It was already past 7:30. My actual date had probably come and gone, but I didn't care. Somewhere between the crayons and the chaos, I found a kind of peace I hadn't felt in months. And maybe it was the wrong table. But it didn't feel like the wrong place. Not even a little. The funny thing is, I didn't leave that table right away. I told myself I would. Just as soon as the napkins ran out, or someone asked me to leave, or the awkwardness finally caught up. But none of that happened. Instead, I stayed. Camille Hart, as I'd later learn her name to be, had this way of smiling at her kids that made me want to sit straighter, breathe deeper, and maybe even try harder to be good. Not impressive, not perfect, just present. The younger boy, Milo, had made a paper airplane out of a napkin and launched it right into my iced tea. I gasped, and Camille just handed me her water like it was the most natural thing. She didn't rush. She didn't scold. She laughed with that kind of tired softness I hadn't heard in a while. Not exhausted, just used to joy coming wrapped in spilled drinks and sticky fingers. Her older son, Theo, asked me if I believed that dinosaurs had feathers. I said I wasn't sure. He looked at me like I'd just admitted I didn't believe in gravity. Camille asked me what my Sundays looked like. Not what I did for work, not where I went to school. She wanted to know if I was more pancakes or bagels, if I read in bed, or cleaned the fridge. I told her I was the kind of person who folded laundry while watching documentaries about shipwrecks. She nodded like that made sense. We talked about the pizza like it was a Michelin meal. Camille said the crust was underrated. I said the sauce was a little too sweet. Milo argued that ketchup belonged on everything. Theo told him that was culinary blasphemy. I nearly choked on my soda laughing. There was a moment about halfway through the meal when Camille looked at me across the table and smiled like she'd forgotten I wasn't supposed to be there. I smiled back like I had too. The kids bickered but gently. Camille kept one eye on them and one on me, and somehow neither of us seemed to need to fill the silence when it came. It felt strange. Not the awkward kind of strange. The kind where you realize you've been holding your breath and suddenly remember how to inhale. I remember Milo asking if I knew how to whistle. I said no. He tried to teach me right there with spaghetti sauce on his chin. Theo rolled his eyes, but not unkindly. He said if we were grading the attempt, I'd get a solid C. Camille said I deserved a B for effort, and winked. The table next to us had a couple on their phones the entire time. I noticed because for once I wasn't looking at mine. Camille asked me how I like to spend rainy afternoons. I told her about the reading nook in the back corner of the library and how I always meant to organize the return cart, but never did. She asked what kind of books I hated shelving the most. I said celebrity memoirs. She laughed almost too hard, then quickly said she wasn't judging. By the time dessert arrived, we were sharing a slice of cheesecake none of us had ordered. Milo had somehow charmed the server into bringing it by claiming it was his birthday. It wasn't. He just said every dinner should end with something sweet. I couldn't argue. We left the restaurant sometime around 8:45. Outside, the air had that crisp snap that made me wish I'd worn my thicker coat. Camille pulled a hoodie out of her car and handed it to me like we'd done this before. Like I was someone who'd left sweaters in her back seat. She helped Theo buckle up and gave Milo a kiss on the forehead that made me want to cry. Not because it was sad, because it was safe. When she turned back to me, there was a hesitation. A small moment where we both knew we were in something we hadn't planned for. I thanked her. She said it was her pleasure. Milo yelled that he hoped I'd come over for pancakes sometime. I watched them drive off, standing there like someone had hit pause on a really beautiful movie I didn't want to end. I didn't even know Camille's last name. I didn't have her number. I had no idea what any of this meant. But I knew I didn't want it to be over. I went home, kicked off my shoes, and stared at my phone for half an hour. Then I opened the dating app and scrolled through my messages until I found the one from Doug. I reread it. He'd bailed after 15 minutes and left a passive-aggressive comment about ghosting. I deleted the app. The next night, just after 7:15, I found the receipt from the restaurant and realized they'd charged everything to one card. Hers. I remembered Milo saying something about grown-ups sharing food and wallets. I didn't want to seem like I was paying her back. I just wanted to say, thank you. So I tracked down the restaurant's number, called the hostess, and left a message asking if they could pass along mine. Just a first name, Lena, and a note that said, Thanks for letting me crash your dinner. It was the best mistake I ever made. Then I turned off my phone, curled up with a book I didn't read, and smiled into the dark. It was a Thursday morning, gray and unremarkable, the kind of day that drifts by without asking much of you. I was shelving a cart of biographies at the back of the library, thinking about nothing more serious than whether we needed another copy of the Julia Child book, when my phone buzzed with a link from my coworker Jenny. The message just said, "Isn't this your pizza night, lady?" I clicked the link without thinking. The headline hit me like cold water. Local CEO Camille Hart spotted dining in Montpellier with mystery woman and kids. There was a photo, grainy but clear enough. It was the moment outside the restaurant. Camille, her boys, and me standing there like we belonged. For a second, I didn't breathe. I just stared at the name. CEO of Hartwell Health, one of the largest nonprofit healthcare companies in the Northeast. Awards, boards, national press, a dozen speaking engagements. Camille Hart. I dropped my phone, literally. It hit the carpet between the stacks and buzzed again with another message I ignored. My stomach turned. My face burned. I felt like someone had slapped a label on me I didn't ask for and didn't understand. I picked the phone back up and scrolled through the article. There was a quote from someone speculating about a soft launch relationship. Another one debating whether she was testing new nanny candidates in disguise. I felt sick. Had it been a game? An experiment? A project for her next podcast? I remembered her asking about my Sundays, not my resume. Letting me wipe spaghetti off Milo's chin like it was normal. Laughing about ketchup on pizza crust. None of it made sense now. Not if she was that person. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I finished my shift in a fog, said goodnight to Jenny without really hearing what she said, and went home. I paced. I replayed every moment in my head. Her hoodie in my hands. Her boys calling me funny. Her silence at the end of the night. I didn't know what to believe. The next morning, just after 10:15, she walked into the library. She wasn't dressed like a CEO. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweatshirt, hair pulled back in a way that looked accidental but probably wasn't. Her eyes scanned the front desk until they landed on me. I froze. I thought about ducking into the back room, pretending to be someone else, saying I was on break, but I didn't move. I just stood there, my heart thudding in my ears. She walked slowly, like she wasn't sure I'd let her get close. She stopped a few feet from the counter. She didn't smile. She just looked tired. Not the kind of tired from meetings or jet lag. The kind you carry in your chest when you know you've hurt someone and you don't know how to fix it. She said, "I didn't mean for you to find out like that." I stared at her, not speaking. My hands were clenched around a return slip. She kept her voice low. I wanted one night where I could just be a mom. Not a CEO. Not a headline. Just a tired woman with 2 hungry kids and bad timing. I swallowed hard. You let me believe you were nobody. She shook her head gently. I never thought I was nobody. I just hoped for once I didn't have to be somebody else. I looked at her and saw all the moments again. The napkin airplane, the spilled lemonade, the quiet kindness. It hadn't felt fake. It had felt real in a way that scared me even more now. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because you were happy," she said simply. "And I haven't seen someone that happy around me just for me in a long time." I didn't want it to end. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still felt like the punchline to a joke I hadn't been let in on. But another part saw the way her shoulders curled slightly forward like she was bracing for rejection. She pulled something from her bag, a folded piece of paper, crayon scribbles. Milo had drawn me a picture of a cat with glasses reading a book. I stared at it. "They like you," she said softly. "So do I. And not because you didn't know my name, because you saw me anyway." I blinked fast, heart pounding. This wasn't simple, it wasn't fair, but it wasn't a lie either. Not really. And that somehow was even harder to hold. "I don't know what to do with this," I said. Her voice caught. "Me either. But I'd rather try than pretend it didn't matter." We stood there surrounded by books and overdue notices and everything unsaid. Then I said the only thing that felt right. "I'm still mad." She nodded. "I can live with that." I didn't forgive her. Not yet. But I didn't ask her to leave either. And that for now felt like enough. I didn't know right away. It started with my phone buzzing just after 9:30 that morning. Then it buzzed again. And again. I was still brushing my teeth when Jenny called asking if I was okay. I didn't know what she meant. I checked my texts. The first thing I saw was a screenshot of a tweet. My face. Standing on Camille's front porch. Milo holding my hand. Theo laughing beside us. Someone had taken the photo from across the street, probably from a car. The caption said something like CEO soft launches mystery woman with her kids. There were hashtags, guesses about my identity, comments on my outfit, my weight, my job. They found an old photo of me from a Halloween event at the library and said I looked desperate. Another person posted my Goodreads profile and mocked the books I liked. I felt the ground tilt under me. My heart raced. My hands shook. I tried to call Jenny back but couldn't think straight. I opened Instagram. It was worse there. Hundreds of comments. People saying I was using Camille for money. Others defending me with stories they were making up. One person claimed to have gone to high school with me. I was homeschooled. I couldn't breathe. I shut my phone off and threw it under the couch. I sat there on the floor for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stared at the coffee table, too afraid to open the curtains. The world had cracked open and swallowed me whole. And the worst part was none of these people knew anything true. By afternoon, I stopped answering my door. Jenny knocked. My neighbor left a bag of groceries. I didn't open it. I was too afraid someone would be outside with a camera or a question or a microphone. At 5:15, I heard the knock I'd been dreading most. Not the press. Not a stranger. It was Camille. I didn't move. She knocked again, softer this time. I held my breath and stayed behind the door. She said my name quiet, like she already knew I wouldn't answer. She waited. Then she said she was sorry. I still didn't open it. She said she didn't know it would happen this fast. She said if she could take it all back, she would. That she never wanted me to feel like a target. That Milo had asked why the internet hated the library lady. My chest ached. She said she missed me. I pressed my forehead to the door, silent. I didn't speak. I didn't let her in, because none of this felt like it belonged to me anymore. I had wandered into a life too big, too watched, too sharp around the edges. I heard her footsteps walk away. I slid down to the floor, curled into myself, and finally let the tears come. Not loud, not cinematic, just slow and steady and tired. I didn't want to be brave. I didn't want to be a hashtag. I just wanted my quiet life back, and maybe somewhere deep down I wanted her to knock one more time. But she didn't. And I didn't blame her. It showed up in my mailbox around 10:40 that morning. No envelope. Just a single sheet of construction paper folded carefully and half the edges worn soft like it had been held too many times. I recognized the handwriting right away. All blocky letters and backward L's, Milo. Inside was a dinosaur. big head, tiny arms, bright green crayon strokes bleeding through the paper. Beside it was a stick figure in glasses holding a book. My hair looked like a fuzzy brown cloud. Underneath, he wrote in shaky letters, "I miss the library girl." I sat down on my front steps and stared at it for a long time. There wasn't a message from Camille. No note, no signature. Just that little boy's honest, open heart scribbled in colors. And suddenly the noise faded. The hashtags, the headlines, the strangers arguing about my life. All I could think about was the crayon lines and how he saw me still. My chest tightened in that aching way when something inside starts to thaw. I didn't call right away. I made tea. I didn't drink. I walked to the mailbox and back 3 times. I sat on my couch and held the drawing like it was made of glass. Then just after 2:30, I picked up my phone and called the number I'd deleted but hadn't really forgotten. She answered on the first ring. Her voice cracked on my name. I almost hung up. I said he drew me with a dinosaur. She exhaled. I didn't ask him to. I know I said. That's why it mattered. There was a pause. Then I asked, "What am I to you if I never made the news?" Silence. I waited. She said, "You're the first person who made my kids laugh without trying. You're the only one who saw me before Googling me. And I think you're the only person I've wanted to tell the truth to even when it scared me." My eyes burned. "That's who you are, Lena," she whispered. With or without the news, for the first time in days I felt steady again. Not fixed, not famous, just seen. And maybe ready to be seen a little more. Emil's house by the lake wasn't the one the magazine showed. It was smaller, older, with chipped paint around the porch and a tire swing creaking in the breeze. The water lapped softly just past the backyard where 2 tents leaned toward each other like secrets being shared. I parked under a maple tree just after 5:15. Camille opened the door before I knocked, wiping her hands on a dish towel and smiling like I hadn't been gone. Milo was already barefoot. Theo held a flashlight even though the sun hadn't set. Inside it smelled like butter and toasted bread. Camille was burning grilled cheese again. I stepped in, took the spatula from her hands and flipped the sandwich before it could blacken. She laughed and something deep inside me settled. Dinner was chaotic. Theo insisted on cutting his sandwich into a star. Milo dropped his juice twice. I found ketchup in my hair, but I couldn't stop smiling. Later, we sat in the backyard under soft string lights while the boys chased lightning bugs. Camille handed me a worn photo. It was her and a woman with kind eyes, their foreheads pressed together. Smiles, quiet and full. "My wife," she said. Her name was Jordan. I listened. She was sick for almost 2 years. One night after the boys were asleep, she made me promise that I wouldn't stay alone forever, but that if I let someone in again, they had to be someone who could make the boys laugh. Camille's voice caught. Someone who didn't care about the headlines. Just us. I didn't know what to say. So I reached for her hand and held it between both of mine. She looked at me. This wasn't how I thought it would go. "Me either," I whispered. We tucked the boys into their tents after 8. Theo asked if I'd read his book. Milo crawled into my lap before the first page. Camille watched from the steps, arms around her knees, eyes soft. Afterward, we sat by the water. I could hear frogs. The air smelled like pine and rain. Camille leaned against my shoulder and sighed like she was finally exhaling everything she'd been holding. I thought about all the ways this could have gone differently. How a wrong table, a spilled drink, a napkin drawing somehow led to this moment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't planned. But it was real. Some families aren't found. they're made, one moment at a time.